Joseph Alves. Joseph has been working at the Statistics Canada for nearly a decade. In April 2020, he moved to the Statistical Geomatics Center where he joined the Postal Code unit. One of the main projects that attracted him to that area was the modernization of the geocoding application for the Postal Code Conversion File and Postal Code by Federal Writing File. So I'd like to now turn the call over to Joseph for his presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. I will start by sharing my screen and then we'll jump into it. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Joseph, and I'm going to start off today's series of presentations with a background of the PCCF, as well as highlight some of the changes made to the PCCF in the past year as we moved over to a new geocoding application named P-Code2Geo. I'm estimating this should take about 10 minutes, which will then be followed by any questions you may have. So let's jump right into it. Okay, so quick brief background of what we produce. So first, the Postal Code Conversion File, PCCF, which links our 6-character postal codes to standard geographic areas such as dissemination areas, census tracts, and census subdivisions. And by linking postal codes to standard geographic areas, the file facilitates the extraction and subsequent aggregation of data for selected geographic areas. This associates each postcode with a longitude and latitude coordinate to support mapping applications. The other file we produce, we won't talk about it too much today, but I thought I would bring it up, is the Postal Code by Federal Writings file, the PCFRF. And this file provides a link between the 6-character postal code and Canada's federal electoral districts. Okay, so some details about the PCCF. The first PCCF was created here at StatCan in 1983. We link approximately 900,000 unique postal codes across the entire country to dissemination geography. And we are currently now geocoding to the 2021 census dissemination geographies. A postal code can be geocoded as high as a census subdivision all the way down to the block face level for most records. Inside the PCCF, we include supplementary data for each record, such as the single link indicator, quality indicator, source, and a lot more. The next presentation after mine will go a little more in depth on these data fields as well as the geographies inside the PCCF. And we release the PCCF quarterly alongside an updated reference guide in English and French. Okay. How we previously produced, and we had a system called PCUS, which stood for the Postal Code Update System. So the PCUS application took in the monthly postal code data we received from Canada Post and identified any new postal codes that were not in our database. If a new postal code wasn't in our database and the address range existed on our road network file, the database was updated with a new postal code linked to our dissemination geographies. And from this database, we were able to produce the PCCF and PCFRF. So this is a cumulative method to geocoding. Instead of older records being updated, a new record for the same postal code would be entered, leaving multiple records per postal code. And consequently, manually geocoded entries were kept in the database for decades without being updated. So in short, this legacy system was developed about 20 years ago, and it was definitely great at the time of development. Over the years, though, we discovered ways in which would be much better. We could do much better, especially with advancements in computing hardware, because this method, there was a lot of manual intervention every time we produced, which increased the risk of errors. And I mentioned about manually geocoded entries. The majority of the records in the old PCCF were manually geocoded at approximately 2/3 of the file, and we didn't have any tracking metrics available for each entry. We couldn't determine if a single manually geocoded entry was geocoded 15 or 20 years ago, and then those outdated records were just left inside the PCCF. So going forward, we went from PCS to P-code to Geo. So throughout the pandemic, our unit, alongside our friends in IT, developed a new geocoding application named P-code to Geo. We had our first release using P-code to Geo on March 15th, 2022, linking postal codes to 2021 census dissemination geographies. So March 2022 had two milestones. It was the first PCCF with P-code to Geo and the first PCCF linked to 2021 geographies. So now that we had a brief background of the PCCF and the previous methods of geocoding, let's dig into some of the highlighted changes you may notice in the PCCF today. First off, all postal codes are geocoded for each production run instead of cumulatively adding to the database. So this ensures that each record is up to date. So instead of adding more and more records for the same postal code and consequently bloating the file with outdated or repetitive data, the slate is cleaned before each production cycle. The second point here, records can now be automatically geocoded using the postal code latitude longitude coordinates from Canada Post. So this is something that we previously needed to do manually every production cycle in PCS, as we didn't have the capability to automatically geocode lat long coordinates. We would run some quality assurance scripts to see what postal codes were missing from the PCCF and then manually append these records, but only at the CSD level. There were approximately 12,000 records each quarter that needed to be added in, majority of them being the same postal code quarter after quarter. Of course, no longer the case, as they're now automatically geocoded, and most of them are actually geocoded at the block face level. And on that subject of geocoding at the block face level, 93% of the records being automatically geocoded are at that level, which results in the PCCF being a cleaner and more accurate data file. As a last resort for geocoding, we geocode with imputation methods to cover almost all postal codes in the country. This is a last resort, as I said, but it's only about 0.5% of the file that is geocoded that way. So it's a very small number. We're usually able to geocode using regular methods. And our last point here, a PCCF without retired records inside the data file and an updated retired file with each PCCF release, rather than updating a cumulative retired file every 5 years. So I'll give a bit more background on this last point. You may have noticed in the past that the PCCF would have retired records in it, and now it doesn't anymore. It only contains active records. This all stems back to the cumulative method of geocoding I described before with PCS. PCS had a cumulative database until we switched to the new census dissemination geographies. For example, when we switched from 2011 census geos to 2016, the retired records were then placed in a retired file named R2015 that some of our experienced users may recall. That file remained static, and any postcode that was retired after that remained in the PCCF. Now, the retired file is produced in exactly the same method as the PCCF with quarterly releases. So some additional changes that are in the PCCF today. The naming convention of our postcode data products is now aligned with the Canada Post Corporation. So previously, our naming convention was a month behind. For example, the February PCCF was released in March. Now we receive March Canada Post data that is used to produce the PCCF that is released in March. So no more of that month overlap. It's March PCCF released in March containing March data. We have the addition of a new representative point type value, and that is the value of 5. It is now included to state that a record is geocoding at the province level. However, we currently do not need to geocode any record at the province level, as we're able to geocode at a minimum right now at the census subdivision. So this is simply a fail-safe option if the time comes that we can't, for whatever reason, geocode to a CSD. And we also had the addition of 2 new source values. 5 is included now to state a record was geocoding using lat long coordinates, as I mentioned before, And same with 6 is included to state a record was geocoding using imputation methods. Okay, I figured I'd add in some metrics to show some of the difference with data between the two files. So these tables here are showing the rep point type. So this is saying this identifies where a record is geocoded to. 1 being the block face, 2 dissemination block, 3 dissemination area, or 4 census subdivision. So in table 1 over here, this is from 2016 geos, the December 15th, 2021 PCCF, and table 2 is 1 year later, December 15th of 2022. So the big point here is at the block face level. Previously, only 81% of the file was at the block face level, where now we're almost at 93%. And 98% of the file, at least at the dissemination block, as opposed to 92%. Okay, some more metrics, and this is to showcase the improvement of our geographic coverage across Canada. We're comparing the same 2 files, December 2021, that was geocoded to 2016 geos, and December 22, which is 2021 geos. So the important numbers here are the totals at the bottom. As you can see, there are about 450 additional CSDs in the new file to expand our geographic coverage of the country. And the same for DAs, about 400 more DAs in the new file. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. So that concludes our part of today's presentation. And Brad and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Joseph. It was great. Everyone, I see that more people joining us during this presentation. I would like to just say hi to everyone and mention that this meeting will be recorded. I would appreciate everyone to just mute yourself during the presentation. And now, if you have any questions for Joseph's presentation section, please put it in the chat box. We have a short Q&A question at the end of each presentation and the big Q&A question section at the end of this webinar. So we can go through the questions and answer them, but you can add your question to the chat box at any time during the presentation. We will try to cover that at the end of the webinar as well. So I see that Rihan is just raised his hand, so please go ahead.
Thank you so much for such a conclusive presentation and seeing how detailed the analysis was. I know that when you're geocoding, tracking how much you have geocoded at what level is very difficult. So I'm from town of Halton Hills. We recently came across a query where some of the residents were asking about postal codes shared between the 2 townships. So that happens, it's very evident. But, when you say that the data is available at block face level, that means that we can see it as polygons. And if so, is it true? It's point-based?
So in the file, it's just a data set file. We do have the coordinates for the lowest geocoded geography in the record. So it is a common misconception that it's the latitude, longitude of the postal code inside the PCCF, but it's actually the latitude, longitude of the lowest geography. So if it is geocoded at the block face, you have those coordinates, but you would have to do that mapping yourself.
Okay. And who is your elusive contact at Postal Code or Canada Post? Can you reveal your sources?
I don't think I can reveal my sources, no, but We do have regular communication with Canada Post, and we do receive. I do have a contact where I do receive monthly data from them because we need the data monthly to produce the files. So we are in constant communication.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for your answering.
Thanks.
Can I add just one little point? Steal the floor for 10 seconds?
For sure, Brad.
Canada Post does have an inbox for anyone who has questions about Canada Post data products or Canada Post questions. You can contact their inbox, and we can actually supply you with the email address to the Canada Post inbox, because we like it when you talk to Canada Post also.
Thank you so much. I would love to have that contact. I did, I do mapping on and off, and I'm sorry I'm stealing your time, but I find it that many people I don't get the responses. For example, I contacted Ministry of Transportation about getting the shields for the highways, for when you're producing the maps, you need the shields in ArcGIS. So I still haven't heard, contacted multiple times. So, but thank you so very much, Brad. I think I need to connect with you.
Just let me clarify. You can ask Canada Post many questions about their products, which they're actually selling the PCCF. But if you have any technical questions, Canada Post will send you to us. Canada Post will send you to Joseph and I. So in that case, you need to email our PCCF inbox at Statistics Canada. And we can supply you with that email address also. And then you can email Joseph and I directly.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, so I did drop the email for Canada Post in the chat. That is their email for any data you would like to acquire from them, or if you have any questions. And now I'll also drop our email for PCCF inquiries in the chat as well. Yes.
Great. Thanks, Joseph. I think we have a few minutes for one more question for Joseph. Is that how are the rural postal codes geocoded in the new system? Are there any changes, improvements for rural areas?
So yes, all postal codes are geocoded in the same way. However, it is sometimes harder for us to geocode rural postal codes at a low level of geography. So the majority of postal codes in urban areas are at the block face level. We do try, if we do have enough information in our road network file here at StatCan, and with the data we do get from Canada Post, we're going to try to go as low as we can in rural areas. But if not, it's just going to be geocoded at dissemination block or DA or the CSD. Right now, nothing is lower than the CSD, so it'll at least be geocoded at the CSD. I talked about how we now can use the latitude longitude coordinates. So if Canada Post gives us those latitude longitude coordinates for a rural postal code, we usually could get pretty low, which is something we couldn't do before because we could only geocode those latitude longitude to the CSD. And then as a last resort, the imputation method, where we start by looking at the first 5 digits of the postal code compared to the 5 digits of another postal code, and if we could get an imputation match that way.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, Joseph, would you like to answer the last question?
Yeah, so the question is, the coordinates mentioned in the latitude and longitude are the center blocks of the center point of the blocks? Yes, they are the centroid for the lowest level of geography. So if you're looking at the rep point type value, it'll have a value of from 1 to 4, saying where it's geocoded to, and then the coordinates for that are the centroid of that geography.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Joseph.
No problem.
So, Great. So we're going to start our second presentation. So before starting that, I would like to introduce Gerald Maureen. Gerald has a 20-plus year career at the Statistics Canada in various data production and dissemination roles, with the majority of time as a subject matter expert in the field of Statistics Canada geography and GIS, working extensively with data users and custom geographies. Gerald is currently managing the custom data and geography production team within Statistics Canada's Statistical Information Service in Toronto. So with that, I would like to turn things over to Gerald for his presentation.
All right, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. I've actually dropped the PCCF into Microsoft Access so I could walk you through this. For the community data program, you access the Postal Code suite of products through Canada Post. My team is responsible and handles distribution for Postal Code products to our federal share partners. So there's a number of federal departments who actually get access to the PCCF for free directly through us. It's part of our agreement, our licensing agreement with Canada Post. So what I would like to share with you today is essentially the record layout and go over some key features of the product. We'll point you towards some key resources to help you use the file better. Mike will later on go into more detail on how you access the file and how you actually are going to use it. As Joseph described, the PCCF links 6-digit postal codes to standard geographic areas, such as dissemination areas, census tracts, census subdivisions. In fact, the PCCF links postal codes to all of our standard geographies, from dissemination blocks right up to provinces and territories. The PCCF also associates each postal code with a latitude and longitude, as we were just talking about, and that allows the file to be used in mapping applications such as ArcGIS or QGIS. Now, due to the size of the file, you can't use the PCCF in a program like Microsoft Excel. The file is just simply too big. The limitations in Excel only allow for data to have a maximum of approximately 1 million rows. As a result, the PCCF easily exceeds the row limit of Excel. You really need to be using the product in a program like Microsoft Access or statistical software such as SAS or R. The alternative, as I mentioned, is to bring the file into mapping applications like ArcGIS, where you can display the full database based upon the coordinates that are in that file. So just how big is the PCCF? The December 2022 release, which is a couple of releases ago for us, contains 1,368,853 records. With the new geocoding system, this is down significantly from what used to exist in the 2016 census cycle. The file previously was closer to 1.8 million records. So the new geocoding system has significantly improved the quality and accuracy of the postal code conversion file. There are, in December, 885,284 unique postal codes in the file. 882,833 of those are active postal code files. So Joseph was talking a bit about the retired file, the retired postal codes being pulled out. There are still some retired postal codes in this file that you're using now. Needless to say, when you're dealing with a file with 1 million plus records, it's a big file. It's a lot to work with. Due to the nature of postal codes, they can appear as a single record in the PCCF, or they can appear as multiple records with differences in the linkages. This is due to the nature of the postal code geography. Remember that Canada Post creates postal codes strictly for the purposes of mail delivery. As a result, postal codes can take on many different appearances. A postal code in one place could provide coverage for a single building, a single address, and be limited to a single record. In other areas, especially rural and northern areas, they could cover multiple municipalities and as a result have many records in the PCCF. Now, Statistics Canada only produces the postal code conversion file as a flat text file. So it is incumbent upon the user to import that file using the record layout in the user guide into whatever analytical type program that they're using. In the case of what you're seeing in front of you, I bring it automatically with each release into Microsoft Access and into ArcGIS so that we can do our own internal work with the postal code conversion file. Out of the 885,000 postal codes in the PCCF, 74% of them appear as only a single record in the file. Another 18% of the records are limited, the postal codes are limited to 2 records. That means 92% of the file has 2 or less records for an individual postal code. That allows for, we'll call it accurate positioning of postal codes for those postal codes, those 92% of postal codes. The remaining 8% of records, however, contain multiple linkages, anywhere from 3 linkages to potentially dozens or even hundreds of linkages, just given the nature of the postal code geography, especially in those rural and northern areas. As previously noted, the PCCF links postal codes to all Statistics Canada geographic areas. A discussion on our geographies would be an entirely different presentation. Needless to say, there are geographies for everyone, every possible need. Small geographies, large geographies, administrative geographies like municipalities, statistical geographies like dissemination areas and census tracts. For an overview of our standard geographies, there are resources available on our website that will help you understand each and allow you to take full advantage of the PCCF. This is our homepage for our website. If you go to Census and Census of Population, that'll take you to the main Census of Population landing page. Under Census Geography on the navigation bar you see here, if you click on Census Geography and scroll down, you'll be able to go into reference documents. And under reference documents, you will see a link into the illustrated glossary. The illustrated glossary contains detailed definitions for all our geographic areas. So at any point in time, you'll be able to click on one of these definitions and see a detailed definition for that geography that lines up with what you would see in the PCCF. I'm going to paste the link for the illustrated glossary into the chat when I'm done the presentation. So you'll actually be able to go in and take a look at the illustrated glossary and the details that are there. Now, anytime you have questions on Statistics Canada geographies, this really should be your first stop in to go in and take a look at what the definition is. If there are still questions, however, you shouldn't hesitate to reach out to the Community Data Program. Mike and the team at the CDP essentially have us on speed dial for support. So we are there to make sure that you guys have the answers that you need to be able to do the analysis and the work that you do. Let me flip back to the PCCF in Access. As I mentioned, the PCCF is too large to work with in Excel, so this is our primary tool for working with the file. The front half of the PCCF, as you can see here, basically contains a link into all our standard geographic areas, everything from census tracts to federal electoral districts to CSDs, DAs are all covered in a column within the file. If we remove the standard geographies from the presentation here, let's focus just strictly on the remaining records that are in the file. These records come from either our internal database and the work we do to create the PCCF, or come directly to us from Canada Post and their files that we receive on a monthly basis. Joseph and Brad discussed the rep point type variable and showed us some of the numbers from a recent release. The rep point type identifies whether the record uses a block face, dissemination block, dissemination area, census subdivision, or province and territory as a source of its linkage. Think of it this way: the lower the level of the geography, the better, the more accurate the data is. Block faces are better than dissemination blocks. Dissemination blocks are better than dissemination areas. So really, the lower the rep point type number, the more accurate the linkage is. So a 3, as you see here, is better than a 4. A 1 is better than a 2. As Joseph noted, approximately 93% of the records in the PCCF are automatically geocoded to a block-based level. The intent is to link each postal code down to the lowest level of geography possible, to make each linkage as accurate as possible. So the big question, and this actually has already come up today, is what is a block face? Let me flip back over to the illustrated glossary. If we scroll down, you can actually go in and see a written definition and an image of what a block face is. So a block face represents one side of the street between two consecutive features intersecting that street. The features can be other streets or boundaries or standard geographic areas. Block faces are used for generating block face representative points, which in turn are used for geocoding and census data extraction. Basically, having block faces allows us to link each data point back up through our entire standard geographic hierarchy, giving you all the data linkages, all the geography linkages that you see in the PCCF. Let's flip back to the PCCF. So that was rep point type. One of the critical fields that allow you to work with records that have multiple linkages is a single link indicator, the SLI. The SLI can be used to establish a one-to-one relationship between postal codes and geographic areas. The SLI has a value of 1 to flag one record of an active postal code. That record is intended to be the best fit record for that postal code. So if you're working with multiple postal codes, it allows you to identify a representative sample, a single postal code to use as your linkage. The methodology used for the single link indicator was changed for the 2021 census. For most of the file, those with single linkages, assigning an SLI equals 1 is pretty easy. There's only one record to assign that SLI equals 1 to. But when we have more than one record, whether it's 2 records or 100 records, we need to be able to identify which record should have the SLI equals 1. The second step in the process of assigning an SLI equals 1 basically takes a look at the data quality indicator field, which comes a little further in the postal code conversion file. And the plan, the aim is to assign the SLI equals 1 to the record with the highest data quality, so that you're making sure that you're getting the record with the absolutely best information to match. When there's basically a tie and you're dealing with multiple records with the same data quality records, that's when we start getting into other factors such as population density and civic addresses that are taken into consideration in the assigning of the SLI equals 1. If there's questions on the SLI equals 1, this is where I'm glad we have Joseph and Brad on our team here today to be able to help you answer and understand that a little bit better. The next field we have here is the PC type. This indicates the type of addresses that are served by the postal code. So a code type of 1 represents a street address with letter carrier service, a code type of 2, a street address with route service, and so on. There's complete descriptions of all these postal code, all these codes within the user guide. The user guide is your friend when working with the PCCF. There is a lot of information that is contained within that user guide that is critical to help you fully use and fully get the most out of this product. The community name field comes directly from Canada Post. Community name is defined by Canada Post, denotes any city, town, village in Canada that is recognized as a valid mailing address. There are geographies found in the community name field that aren't official legal municipalities. For example, places like Scarborough, Etobicoke, Nepean, places that 20 years ago were actual legal municipalities, but were lost to amalgamation, still exist within the PCCF as a community name. This is really a historical legacy that Canada Post maintains within their own data, and we bring over into the PCCF. Delivery mode type is the next field we'll look at. The delivery mode type is defined by Canada Post. Essentially, each postal code is assigned a character value indicating the type of delivery method used for that postal code. The type could be anything from a block base, an apartment building, a business, or even a post office box. It's possible that some postal codes, if that postal code has multiple records, could have more than one delivery mode type. This is where you would also be able to identify postal codes that are retired. So anything that is retired has a delivery mode type of the letter Z. Over the course of a year, since I'm mentioning here the retired postal codes, Canada Post retires approximately 12 to 1,300 postal codes. So that information basically carries through not only the PCCF, but the retired postal code file that Joseph was talking about that you also have access to. If I scroll a little bit further to the right, we will see birth date and retired date. Birth date and retired date are based upon information supplied by Canada Post to Statistics Canada. These fields tell us when a postal code was introduced by Canada Post, and in the case of retired postal codes, when Canada Post stopped using it. This information only goes back so far. At a certain point, there's essentially a default value for the birth date and the retired date, unfortunately. Next up is the delivery installation or PO type. This allows us to identify whether a record is a post office location where mail can be accessed. Not all postal codes get delivery service to your door or to a super mailbox. Sometimes users actually use post office boxes that are tied to specific mail facilities, and that's all captured in the PCCF data, allowing you to extract out that kind of detail for each of the postal codes that you're working with. As part of the geocoding we do to create the PCCF, we create a data quality indicator, the QI field. The QI is established at a record level and is currently available only for postal codes that are geocoded using the automated geocoding system that Joseph described. A QI of AAA indicates the highest quality, while a quality indicator of CCC indicates the lowest quality. Records where there's manually geocoding involved have a value of NNN. Essentially, unavailable, not applicable, because they're not automatically geocoded. Finally, there is the source field. The source field indicates the primary source of the geocoding. We've talked about the percentage of the postal codes that are automatically geocoded with the new system. There's approximately 8% of the postal codes that require manual intervention. That's a significant improvement over past cycles and basically allows us to results in a more accurate product that you get to use. Detailed descriptions for each of these codes can be found in the user guide. In terms of coverage, it's important to remember, as I noted, that postal codes are designed for mail delivery, not really of the type of analysis we all try to do with the product. Canada Post mail system is an imperfect system. We're just trying to make sense of it here with the Postal Code Conversion File. One thing that becomes clear when you work with the file, however, is how messy postal codes are. As I mentioned, postal codes can appear as a single record in the PCCF or as multiple records. In terms of coverage, what you end up seeing especially in urban areas, is a lot of overlap when you start looking at standard geographies. For example, it isn't uncommon to have multiple postal codes linking to the same dissemination block or the same dissemination area. On the other side, there's plenty of rural and northern areas in Canada that simply lack population and lack mail delivery, and hence there's no linkage at all in the postal code conversion file. As Joseph was showing in one of his tables, the postal code file links to approximately 54,600 records, or sorry, 54,600 DAs out of a possible 58,000 dissemination areas. So there are approximately 3,500 DAs that make no appearance at all in the postal code conversion file. Now, the other thing to keep in mind with the postal code conversion file is that there is no data included. It's really just a linkage file. This product allows you to link postal code data you may have with our standard geographies and all the standard data that Statistics Canada releases as part of our normal census dissemination routine. There is a ton of data tables for standard geographies available on our website, and CDP receives on a custom basis a large number of data tables that you have access to via the CDP data holdings at a standard geography level. So you really have almost an endless supply of data to link your data into here. Mike is going to get into some of the details of the postal code conversion file and where you can access it. In the interim, does anybody have any questions on the record layout?
Thank you, Gerald. So yeah, we had a question from Mike, and then I believe that the conversation was in the chat box, and the answers is just, yeah, we got the answer. But
All right.
anyone has any questions, please feel free to type it here. We have around 5 minutes for questions regarding Gerald's presentation. And I would appreciate everyone if you could mute your device unless you want to ask your questions now. And yeah, thank you, Gerald. It was great seeing the website, the statistics website for the glossary that I personally used a lot, and to understand the different geographies, and the images were super helpful for me to understand the differences between coming, CD, CSD, and all the details and geographies.
I am pasting the link into the illustrated glossary into the chat now. So if everyone wants to click on that, you can actually go in and explore the illustrated glossary and the detailed definitions that exist for all of our standard geographies. And again, do not hesitate to reach out. And if you have questions on those custom geographies, those standard geographies, you feel free to raise them at any time to Mike, the CDP team, and they know how to find us.
Great. We have a question in the chat box asking, can you expand on how the QI, PO, and SLI interact for rural areas? For example, how would a rural post office box be coded to a standard geography?
Actually, since I was talking about how fortunate we are to have Brad and Joseph involved with this presentation, Joseph, you want to step in and talk about the geocoding to rural post offices?
Sure, not a problem. Let me just look over the question here again. So yes, can you expand on how the quality indicator, PO, which is really delivery installation, and the SLI interact for rural areas? For example, how would a rural post office box be coded to a standard geography? Okay, so the SLI and the quality indicator work together, but not so much the PO. The delivery installation, we're really getting that information from Canada Post. But SLI, as Gerald was saying, was we take numerous steps to identify the SLI, and the quality indicator is a big part of that. So it also depends on how we geocoded that. Was it automatically geocoded? Was it using the lat long coordinates? These might help in your question. Sorry. So if we take, for example, that it was automatically geocoded using lat long coordinates, it might have gone down to the block face. We're probably going to have a high quality indicator of AAA. The PO doesn't really matter how it's geocoded to the standard geography, so it would be down pretty low. But each situation would be different. Inside the Canada Post data, we also have the civic address range or a rural range, and that would also help with the automatic geocoding. But it's tough to narrow down how it would happen for a specific record because each record is geocoded differently. Sorry for the bit of runaround, but sometimes with postal codes, it's tough to answer some of these questions since they all vary to a different degree.
Thank you, Joseph.
No problem.
Is there any other questions for this section? We will also have a big Q&A session at the end of this webinar. If you have any questions and for any remaining questions this session.
I guess, sorry, if I can, rather than just follow up on my question that I put in the chat, because I was asking whether the community name is the same as what's found in the tax filer tables. It's not actually called community name. It's the place name field, but the location that's from tax filer records is obviously taken from people's addresses and postal codes. So I assume that, and a lot of data from the tax filer data, from the tax filer tables is derived using the Postal Code Conversion File, if I'm not mistaken. And so just wondering if that place name field is the same as the community name field, place name field in tax filer data is the same as the community name field in the tax filer tables. But maybe that's for me to follow up on, and then I can post the. I saw Brad saying that that he could follow up as well.
Yeah, no, we do maintain a field called place names in our GeoSuite product. And that information, as Brad pointed out, comes directly from Natural Resources Canada and the geographic names file. So I suspect there are some significant differences between the community names and the place names. Although specifically in regards to the T1 tax filer data, that's a question we would have to go in and get some more specific information directly from our friends in the Center for Income Statistics.
Okay, thanks a lot.
We have one more question. I'm not sure if it's just for Gerald or Joseph. It says, if a rural delivery route, same postal code, crosses 2 or more municipalities, how is the single link indicator assigned?
I could jump in and answer this one. So the first thing is that we would have at least 2 records in the PCCF for that postal code. And they are geocoded first before the SLI is assigned. So now that we have multiple records for the postal code, we are going to try to identify which of these records gets an SLI equaling to 1. So the first part, as Gerald described before, is we're going to look at the quality indicator. So the record with the best quality is going to get an SLI equaling 1 because we have more precise information on where it should be geocoded. A lot of the times, though, in this situation, the quality will be the same. So if the quality indicator is the same, then we're going to go look into the population density of each of the lowest geographies that each record is geocoded to. So let's say they're both geocoded at the block face. We're going to take the population density of the two block faces, and the larger one is going to get the SLI equaling 1. If that doesn't work, we could look at the civic address range, but because it is a rural route, it's probably not going to matter, so the population density should work. But if it was civic for whatever reason, and the population was the same for whatever reason, that would be very rare, then we're just going to be like, okay, which of the civic ranges is a larger number, like which has more dwellings in it. And the one with more dwellings would get SLI equaling 1, but that would be way down the line of tiebreakers.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Joseph. And
no problem.
Thank you, Gerald, for your presentation. So we're gonna go to the third presentation. So last but not least, I would like to introduce my colleague, Michael Dieter. Mike has worked as a program coordinator and analyst for the Community Data Program for the past 8 years. Over the last 20 years, he has worked on various knowledge sharing and monitoring initiatives that focus on the creation and dissemination of indicators to track local trends and inform policy, with a pause taken to return to school for a master's degree in applied science at Montreal Polytechnic. So I would like to turn it over to you, Mike, for your presentation.
Thanks, Saide. I'll try to make my presentation fairly quick. Let me just share my screen here. And everyone can see my screen?
Yes.
So I'll quickly run through a demonstration of how you would go about downloading the file, talk a little bit about how we get the CDP file, and run through a couple of issues that come up fairly regularly with me. They were touched on briefly by the other presenters, and then I thought I could just run through very quickly one example of how someone might use the Postal Code Conversion File. And if we have time, I'm happy just to leave the file open, and if people have questions on how you might work with the file, then happy to try to work through some examples. So I'll go to the website, but I just put this in for the sake of the slide deck that this shows our download screen and how you might look for the data, and then when you're on the catalog entry, a little bit of what it looks like. I've got the links on these images if that helps. We get our updates to the PCCF annually now. Typically we get a December vintage in January. Briefly, we were getting quarterly updates, and that was so that we wouldn't have to wait an entire year to get the PCCF on 2021 geographies. Otherwise, we would have been stuck with 2016 geographies for another 9 or 10 months. Just a little bit of word before I demonstrate downloading the file. I'd just like to talk a little bit about what you can and can't do with it, because we have the PCCF. We do have a commercial license for it, which is part of what lets us share the PCCF with the members of the Community Data Program. But it is a restrictive license, and so we've got warnings on the catalog entry indicating that the PCCF is meant for internal purposes only. So you should not be publishing data from the publishing records from the PCCF or sharing it with non-members. You can take the PCCF and create new correspondences with custom geographies. So say rolling up data from the PCCF postal codes into custom geographies like wards or service delivery areas. And this could be shared so long as you can't reverse engineer back to the postal codes. So in no way should people who are getting this be able to get the original correspondences between the postal code and census geographies. So that's a little heads up for what you can and can't do. So I can cover this quickly before getting into the examples. You know, I just grabbed a few issues that came up from the email record of questions that come up with the PCCF. Usually these are being answered by Gerald. You know, here's a map, just an example from Toronto, someone showing you've got the FSA forward sortation area of M1N in here. Forward sortation area is the first 3 digits of the postal code, and with the lat long coordinates, they found a few postal codes that were outside of that FSA, and this will happen. And it's somewhat unfortunate, but it's I mean, based on what you're doing with the data, that would decide how you want to treat these outliers. But it's just worth noting that the census forward sortation areas, and that's what's being mapped, I think, here, are not necessarily the same as what the Canada Post uses for their forward sortation areas, which these have been developed, as Gerald said, for mail delivery. And so you may occasionally have situations like this coming up, and how to deal with that, you may just need to cut those data out of your analysis. And another, you know, I just threw a few other examples here, which Gerald and Brad touched on as well. You know, you're not going to have all dissemination areas represented in the postal code conversion file. Not all census geographies will have a corresponding postal code for reasons that they've outlined. Rural routes, postal boxes, this can create issues if you're trying to map, if you're trying to take your postal code data and match up some census data to attribute to the people living out those postal codes. You're going to have issues with civic addresses and locations of dwellings may not correspond exactly to what's indicated for that postal code in the PCCF because of rural routes, postal boxes, and other inaccuracies. And you know, a question came up, you know, before about using Google Maps to validate the PCCF, and it's not recommended. The answer from Canada Post was that they've found errors in where Google Maps puts certain postal codes. So I guess the answer there is don't do it. Yeah. I'll quickly run through what it looks like to download the postal code conversion file. There's a few lines and things here because I have an admin account that you wouldn't see, but otherwise everything's how it'll look when you go to the site. So this is on the Find Data page. It brings you to our data catalog. You can look for the postal code conversion file in the product group. That'll bring you here. One thing we're not talking about in this webinar is the postal code conversion file plus. You know, there's a little description of it here. You need to be working with SAS, and it's a means of assigning standard geographies to postal codes in somewhat random, based on population weights, and I think there's some randomness in here, but that is not being covered here. If you want to use the PCCF, it's always best to take the most recent vintage. And we have actually taken the PCCF and cut it down so that it will fit into Excel. As Gerald said, it's much too large on a whole to fit into Excel, but we keep these groupings, and with that you can find the region that you're interested in. Many of you will have already been through this. Some of you may be seeing this for the first time. This is our new website refresh. So the shopping cart and checkout will look slightly different when your file is complete. You don't go directly to your list, your full list of downloads, but you can find what you're downloading here. If you want to see your downloads, I can go to my account and hit the files. This is for the Atlantic, which, you know, then once we click on the download, it'll be downloaded to our computer. So I won't go through, I won't download it right now, so you have to sit and watch me download. I just crack open a file of the Quebec file that I have open here, which, so as we indicated, we have put it into Excel. They are quite large, so even just the Quebec file has 420,000 records in it. If I was going to work through a few examples of what you can do with this file, the very first thing might be you're just interested in one particular postal code. I'll use this one as an example because it has an SLI of 0, so you can see that there will be one record in here that has the SLI of 1, and this is the one which is apparently the best match for this postal code, matching it to this dissemination area. And actually even further, if you want, there is an identifier for the dissemination block. You can go through and see what census subdivision that's associated with, or census division. At this end of the file. So for an example of what you might do with the Postal Code Conversion File, I thought I would grab some of our data from TransUnion.
Is that a request to enlarge the size of the file if you can just enlarge your Excel?
Oh, sure, of course, thanks.
Thank you.
Hopefully that's a little better. Thanks for pointing that out. So I'm using TransUnion data just because it does come to us attached to postal codes, and we use the postal code conversion file to link the TransUnion data to census subdivisions and census tracts. But if this is my completed example, just in case I run out of time. But if we say started with a list of postal codes, you may have data, administrative data for your organization that is all coded by postal codes. In this case, you know, you.
Excuse me, Mike, can you enlarge?
Oh, yes, of course. Thanks again.
A little bit. Thanks.
Yeah. So if, you know, we had, this is indicating that for this postal code, there are 7 mortgages, and the mean value of a mortgage in this postal code is 200. Let me just do that for all of you. 209,000 or so. So if I wanted to, say, roll up these data into census subdivisions and get an average value for mortgages in various census subdivisions, then I would use the PCCF. If I'm going to be rolling up data, then you can't add an average together, you can't add the mean together, but I can add sum together. So this represents, if I take the number of mortgages and the average mortgage, then this is going to give me the total mortgage debt for this postal code, which will let me add up all of the mortgage debt in the aggregate amount, and then I can divide by the number of mortgages. So in this case, I would probably want to use the single link indicator of 1. I'm interested in finding the best value for these postal codes. In other cases, you may be fine taking postal codes that overlap and finding all possible census subdivisions that are overlapped by any of these postal codes. And in this case, I would just look at PCF and SLI equal to 1. So I can take it, I can filter for this, and I might want to just copy out at this point. At this point, I'm really only interested in grabbing census subdivision type. You don't have to watch me go through that. I've actually copied all that in here already. I will increase the size again. And this is more of an Excel tutorial now, but it may be useful to some of you. If I wanted to find the census subdivision names associated with the various postal codes, see, this is all data from the PCCF. Then I'm going to have it search this array, and I want it to. It's going to look up these postal codes, and I want it to return the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th column. So if I were to use the lookup, look for this postal code in this table array, add the dollar signs there so that the reference to the array doesn't change as I copy down the formula. I'm interested in the 6th column, and I want an exact match. So this postal code is located in Quebec. I can go and grab the rest of them. So if I was interested in finding out assuming that this is comprehensive, which it isn't, I've just grabbed a sample of the data, but I could take these data and make a pivot table and sum the total mortgage amount, sum the number of mortgages found in each of these CSDs. I don't like working with doing my calculations on pivot tables, so I'll paste all that here. This is the CSD name, the aggregate mortgage debt, number mortgages, and then mortgage debt would be aggregate mortgage debt divided by. It might look like that. That's a very quick example of how I would take postal code data, use VLOOKUP to search the PCCF, and assign a census subdivision name to that postal code, and then I would roll it all up using a pivot table. And sorry, this is. So that seems like a good first example, but if you have something else that you'd like to see worked on, if you have other questions about what could be done with the PCCF, then I'm happy to take those questions. And I think I can just leave I'll stop my presentation now, and we can also move into the larger question period.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type it in the chat box or raise your hand. So we'll have around 15 minutes to answer all the questions regarding to 3 presentations. But for now, we can just go cover the questions regarding Mike's presentation, and then we go through the other questions. But the webinar is being recorded, and then recording will be available on the Community Data Program website along with the presentation slides. So we will have time in the future to go through the details and then ask your questions later through email. Is that my information at communitydataprogram.ca? Is that the email?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Awesome. But yeah, we have around 50 minutes time now. If anyone has any questions, feel free to add it to the chat box or raise your hand and ask it.
It's encouraging if maybe people are feeling a little more comfortable using the PCCF now. But if ever, it is a somewhat large, unwieldy file, and so if you have questions about using it, just feel free to reach out with the information at communitydata.ca email address.
I'm going to put it.
You have one hand up.
We have one person, so yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I work with Ottawa Public Health, and we were working. I can't remember. I think it was late 2021, and I'm pretty sure that you've covered why this situation couldn't probably exist now. But it wasn't a question of validating through Google Maps. We actually had the address of the place, and then when we used the postal code conversion file, it showed up 2 kilometers away from where it actually was. So the centroid, I mean, the representative point, I mean, was like wrong, like off. So I'm pretty sure that couldn't happen now because of what I think Joseph said. But yeah, it's just to say that you know, when we first looked at it, we could see definitely there was an issue, but it was just that it was kind of crept under the radar, that if, you know what I mean, there was no reason for us to suspect that the representative point was wrong, but it definitely was not the right place. And it wasn't just that there was one address wrong. I mean, one postal code. It was like the slew of them, because it was basically an apartment block. So I just wondered, is it correct now? I'm thinking that probably couldn't happen now because of the way in which the Lang and latitude and longitude are assigned now. Over.
Thanks, Anne. So more likely than not, issues like that have been fixed because we're able to automatically geocode a lot more entries. From the sounds of it, I'm assuming that the postal codes you were looking at previously, and it was in 2021, so it was 2016 dissemination and the old geocoding application. So I'm assuming that it probably wasn't geocoded at like the block face, or probably not even the dissemination block. It might have been the DA or the CSD, which is a larger area, especially a CSD of Ottawa, right? Like it's the centroid's going to be right in the middle and it's going to cover a lot of land. But now, especially in urban areas, it should be a lot more precise. But if you ever do encounter anything like this again, I put our inbox email address in the chat. Please send it over because we want to see any issues and fix them right away. We do release quarterly. I know you guys might not get it quarterly, but we do release the Canada Post quarterly. So we want to fix it for the next quarter if possible, if there is any issues.
Awesome. Will do. Hoping
Thanks.
I won't find any.
Me too.
Because that means somebody's sick over there.
I will say, if you are going to be contacting StatsCan with issues about the PCCF, you can either contact me directly, or if you're contacting them, please copy me, because it's good for us to be at least copied on the thread so we're aware of the issues, and we can save StatsCan some time if we know the answers to some problems. We can give the answers to
Absolutely.
the next
Thank
user
you
that
so much.
has the problem directly.
Great. Thank you. I believe that the next question is for Joseph. It's asking what validation methods are used to verify the postal code coordinates provided by Canada Post?
Great question. So we do have a lot of different validation used, a lot of quality assurance scripts. There's quite a lot. I wouldn't be able to name a lot, but there are a lot built into the geocoding application. So if we're trying to geocode and there are issues, postal codes get generated into a different list that we check after. They don't actually get it into the PCCF. But also, once the PCCF is produced, I do have a lot of scripts I run through SAS to validate that the information in there is correct. A lot of simple checks at first, and then we go more in depth. And like, for example, like an easy one would be just to check if the postal code's right in the right province, because the first letter of each postal code should be in the province. But of course, there are outliers for that too, and then we have to make sure that those outliers, like places like Lloydminster, which is right at the border, Canada Post doesn't care if they're in Alberta or Saskatchewan. They're using the postal code to deliver mail, right? So sometimes those ones go over the border, so we validate those ones. And there's a number of different checks that we go through. But again, same as before, if you ever encounter any issues, contact Mike and ourselves, and we'll fix it.
Awesome. Great. Okay, so we have a couple of more minutes for more questions if you have. Presenters are here to answer your questions. But yeah, I put the community data program email, so you can email your questions later. So we have another question asking, can neighborhood income quantiles be added to the regular PCCF?
Good question. So I'm assuming you are using the PCCF Plus at times to get that information. So the PCCF Plus is actually developed by a different group inside StatCan, so it's not myself and Brad. So any questions about that, you could direct to us and we'll direct you to the right spot. As of right now, because we do have a lot of clients across Canada using the PCCF, we're not looking to expand the record layout. As you may know, and Michael may know, you guys are doing a lot of work with the PCCF. A lot of people are bringing the PCCF into different statistical software. And if the record layout changes, it affects a lot of people. So we try to keep the record layout the same. However, if we do need to change the record layout at some point, let's say some geographies change the length of their values and we must change it, then we are open to expanding the PCCF and add new information.
Perfect. Great. Okay, is there any other questions for presenters? Awesome. So we can go through the final part. Thank you, presenters Joseph, Gerald, and Mike, for your presentation. It was so informative. I personally learned a lot from your presentations, and also great questions we've had, and you answered it beautifully. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you everyone for joining us. Before closing this meeting, I would like to announce our next webinar will take place on Wednesday, May 10, 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. This webinar will be presented by Statistics Canada's team and designed to help CDP members understand the effects of pandemic-related relief benefits on income and other well-being indicators. I'm going to put the registration link in the chat box for more information. And if you would like to register, please use this link. I will stay online for a couple of minutes in case anyone has any questions or concerns. But other than that, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you presenters. Have a great day.
And thank you for having us. Thanks.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Merci.
Bye.
Thank you.
So I believe that we have 116 attendees in this webinar, which was awesome.
Excellent. Very nice. And very enjoyable. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for providing such important information for the CDP.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That was really great.
Because of the, about 5 or 6 years ago, our relationship with Canada Post changed. And as a result,